All right, guys, so here's the deal. So far, we've reviewed over a dozen gaming laptops, and most of you have been asking us about the options for people who just don't want to spend over $1,500. Well, I hear you out loud and clear. So in this video, I'm going to be focusing on these two different models of the new Acer Nitro 5. Now, both of these are less than $1,500 US, and one's less than $1,000. And no, neither of them actually suck. In fact, I think these might be some of the best bang for the buck devices that you'll find right now. But there are a bunch of things that you need to know before jumping onto the bandwagon. But first, let's put this into perspective, because the Nitro 5 series are meant to be Acer's entry-level, budget-focused gaming laptops. They also have crazy number of different spec combos that vary from one region to the next, also one retailer to the next as well. So I picked out two of the most popular models for this review, and they'll be linked in the description down below. All right, so first up, we have this one right over here. So this is a Best Buy exclusive in both Canada and the US, and it goes for $900. And it comes with an i5-12500H and an RTX 3050 Ti running at a maximum power of 95 watts and half a terabyte of PCI Gen 4 storage. Now, one area that Acer saved some money is by equipping both of these laptops with DDR4 memory instead of the usual DDR5 that we've been seeing on a lot of Alder Lake laptops. Now, all of that is topped off with a pretty basic 1080p IPS display with 144 Hz refresh rate. Honestly, that's not a bad price for all the specs that you're getting. The other model is going to be more widely available in North America and other regions on Amazon and Acer's own website. It actually gets a pretty big upgrade with an RTX 3060 that can chug back up to 140 watts and a mux switch. I should also mention that even though it has an i5-12500H, the CPU has been tuned to run at higher frequencies versus the lower end model. Another area where they've been cutting some costs is with the battery on both these models. So they only top out at 57.2 watt hours, and that's about the lowest that I've seen on a gaming laptop in a while. But otherwise, the specs are pretty much the same, but it carries a $430 premium, so be prepared to spend about $1,330 on this one over here. So the only physical differences between these two models are their color themes. Now, the less expensive Best Buy version has a minimalistic design, which I personally like. It's a simple black chassis with some red accents here and there. It's a pretty nice setup if you want to bring your laptop to a coffee shop and don't want to shout gaming PC to everyone over there. The more widely available version has the same construction and overall design, but it spices things up by adding some red, some teal, and some silver color accents, and it looks definitely a little more of the gamery side, but it's not terrible either. But you know what's amazing? Expressing your passion for art through this video's sponsor. Good people, I spend the majority of my time brainstorming ideas, editing videos, and even gaming here at the studio, and I've been meaning to add some personality to my setup. I'm into cars, I love abstract art, and Iron Man is my favorite superhero. So how can I express my passion for these things? Well, meet Displayed. It's a high-quality metal poster that can easily be mounted to a wall using the included magnets. You can browse through millions of licensed designs to suit your setup. As you can see, I picked up exactly what I loved, and it looks incredible. Click the link below to get a special discount if you're interested. All right, so the chassis is an all-plastic setup, but what did you expect? These budget-friendly laptops are mostly focused on internal specs, not high-end materials. But that does lead to some flimsy hinge design that wobbles the display, and it exhibits a lot of flexing when you push this thing down. Now, these aren't thin or light either, even with the whole chassis being constructed out of plastic materials. We're looking at around 5.5 pounds and over an inch thick. And in a lot of ways, this makes it feel like this laptop was designed a few years ago. Honestly, it looks like Acer has been using the same toolkit to construct this new Nitro 5 series compared to the one that I looked at a few years ago. So I'm still guessing portability doesn't really matter all that much to you if you want to use this thing as a desktop replacement. The same thing can be said about the power brick because it is just huge, guys, and it charges the laptop via the standard barrel style connector. Luckily though, the additional height did allow Acer to add a good selection of ports to the new Nitro 5. So on the left-hand side, there's a headphone jack and an Ethernet port. a single USB 3.2 Gen 1 port, and a Kensington lock. On the right-hand side, you get two USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports. And one of those can be used as power-off USB charging. Finally, at the back, we have power in, HDMI 2.1, and there's a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port that's rated for 10 gigabits per second, and it features Thunderbolt 4 support along with DisplayPort pass-through. And it can even be used as a USB-C charger if you're in a pinch. Personally, I love it when manufacturers include these connectors at the back, since they'll be out of your way and you don't have to worry about them, especially when you have a bunch of things connected to the side, like an external mouse or hard drives or other things like that. So that's the good part, but there's one big problem with the Nitro 5, and that's the keyboard. Because honestly, guys, it's one of the worst that I've come across since, well, the previous Nitro 5 that I reviewed a few years ago. Look, I love the fact that Acer's managed to cram a full-size keyboard onto this thing, and having full control over the RGB system is a huge positive, especially when you consider most of the other laptops in this price range use a single color or simple white LED system. But the keys are mushy without hardly any tactile feedback. The spacebar just feels super cramped, and the worst part is just the flex that you experience when you're typing on this thing. It's just really bad. So if you're going to be using this as part of your gaming setup, just do yourselves a favor and pick up a keyboard. It can be any keyboard as long as you're not gaming on this thing, because it's really not that ideal for that use case. The trackpad is, well, it's okay. It's not that great. It uses precision drivers, so accuracy and double finger navigation is pretty good, but the left and right buttons, they just need a bit too forced to actuate. It's also really hard to distinguish one from another since there's a massive dead zone between them. And if you mistakenly press on that, there's a 50-50 chance that you'll press the wrong one. This is the webcam test on the new Nitro 5. Now, both of these models are using the exact same 720p sensor, and the quality is not that great. It is 720p, so don't expect the greatest detail. But I will say that the microphone is really, really good. I did mention this in my previous Nitro 5 video, but Acer somehow has managed to put in a really good quality microphone, so there's great background separation, and there's very less compression with my voice, so it sounds exactly as I want to, so that's pretty good. The speakers are located at the bottom on both models, so naturally they take away the authenticity of a highly defined listening experience. The trebles are okay, I mean, they don't sound that great, and the bass response is pretty much muted. So I would highly recommend picking up a good pair of headphones. Luckily, the built-in DAC is pretty solid. It's mostly bass driven, which I'm sure will add a good kick when you're gaming. Now, let's talk screen on both these laptops. Both of them feature a 15.6-inch 1080p 144Hz display. Unfortunately, they're not 16:10, but instead you get the standard 16:9 aspect ratio, so you'll notice thicker bezels at the bottom. Now, if you recall my review of the previous Gen Nitro 5, Acer was emphasizing the IPS factor, which obviously made you think that it covers 100% sRGB and respectable P3 numbers. But sadly, that wasn't the case. The colors were washed out, and overall, I just wasn't impressed with the quality of the panel. I was hoping for an improvement with the newer models, but what do you know, guys? It's exactly the same. Both models only cover 66% sRGB, 49% Adobe RGB, and 49% P3. That to me, in 2022, is unacceptable because it just goes to show that Acer doesn't want to improve on one of the most important components of a gaming laptop. If you're a student photographer or starting out as a creator, I would highly recommend looking elsewhere. Even if you're looking for a great gaming experience, you know, the 144 Hz is great, but again, the colors just don't look that great. There are better and brighter options in the market, guys. Speaking of brightness, both these models only go as far as 322 nits, so outdoor visibility is not going to be that great. Now, opening both of these next to one another showcased a few differences. You see, in order to handle the additional heat generated by the RTX 3060, the more expensive Nitro 5 has a few cooling system upgrades. There's a bit larger contact plate on the GPU and some additional heat pipes between it and the CPU. There's plenty of upgrade options on both these laptops as well. The memory can be upgraded up to 32 gigabytes. There's an open M.2 slot, and if you really want to expand storage, there's room for a 2.5-inch drive next to the battery. Acer even includes all the necessary hardware and connectors for that drive in an extra bag, but this thing can easily get lost in the box, so make sure you grab it before you toss the entire box into recycling. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video, performance. And honestly, there's really not all that much different between these laptops other than their specs. But let's drill down into how Acer did some little changes to separate one from the other. Let's start with how the processors are handled. Even though both of these models have an i5-12500H, they behave completely differently. In the out-of-the-box default mode, the more affordable $900 one from Best Buy actually ends up running its processor at consistently lower average clock speeds and power when it hits an all-core heavy workload. It's actually pretty crazy to see that just 5 watts on the expensive model gives you an extra 300 megahertz of extra headroom. So yeah, that's pretty insane. The only downside here is that the higher end model needs to run its fans at a bit higher speeds, even though it's got a slightly upgraded heatsink. And the end result of that is that it gets a little bit louder. But what about gaming? Well, Acer actually handles the GPU pretty much the same way too, but you can't really compare these two laptops because they have very different graphics cards. The cheaper one runs the RTX 3050 Ti at 70 watts, while the other one pushes the RTX 3060 all the way up to 100 watts. That's actually a pretty generous amount of power for a gaming laptop that runs for under $1,500. But the only trade-off is that it hits higher frequencies and quite a bit higher noise levels. Okay, so what can we learn from this? Well, remember that in the laptop market, the amount of power funneled into the components actually means more than the components themselves most of the time. And it looks like Acer is actually trying to differentiate both of these laptops by basically equipping the higher end model or the more expensive version with an RTX 3060 and running both the CPU and GPU at higher wattages. Personally, I think that's a great strategy, but it's not something that'll be apparent to people who might be cross-shopping these two laptops. So they might think that the only difference is the graphics card, and that's not the case here at all because the CPUs are clearly running at different power levels. But what is similar between these laptops is their terrible battery life. Acer obviously had to cut somewhere, and this is another place that they chipped since both models have a 57 watt-hour battery, which is one of the smallest ones that we've seen on a gaming laptop in the last few years. So make sure you don't walk too far away from a plug because these laptops aren't about portability at all. But since their processors are relatively efficient under load, they do post good numbers in this scenario. So with all of that taken into account, what's the performance like on the new Nitro 5 series? Well, remember, these have always offered the best price to performance ratios of any gaming laptop around. And even though both of these have a 12500H, which is actually the lowest end CPU we've seen in a gaming laptop this year, Acer has pumped them with enough wattage that they're actually super competitive. I mean, overall, we're looking at real-world results that are beating the 6900HS and just slapping around the 1200H in the Razer Blade 15 like a lazy donkey. But that goes back to my point about how important power envelopes are for performance. Running the 12500H at between 60 and 65 watts allows the relatively inexpensive Nitro 5 laptop to run at right alongside the more expensive laptops that might technically have higher-end CPUs, but run them at much lower levels. I mean, look where the 12900H on that $4,000 Blade 15 lands. It's pretty sad, isn't it? And moving on to gaming, and the results here are pretty much expected, guys. A lot of these games are CPU limited at 1080p, and even though the Nitro 5's i5 CPUs have amazing multi-thread performance, it suffers a bit in gaming even with the RTX 3060 running at 100 watts. But it's still super competitive against much higher priced gaming laptops in a bunch of other titles. It's actually likely because of that mux switch that's helping out as well. Even the RTX 3050 Ti version puts down some pretty respectable numbers. I mean, there's a pretty big gap between it and the next best laptop, but it can still deliver playable frame rates at ultra high detail settings in most games. And when you consider it costs about $900, that's a really good value right there. So fact of the matter is that, like everything else, laptops are getting more expensive these days. But I think the Nitro 5 series is aimed at keeping some more affordable options around, and I appreciate that. But there are a few things to consider about these machines. It's their poor build quality, not so great battery life, Acer's insistence of loading up their devices with tons of bloatware, and most importantly, the display. I was actually really hoping for something better this time. You see, where this series really shines is in the performance for the dollar. If you look at the $900 3050 Ti model, it's actually pretty respectable. And the 3060 version is priced pretty well too. But there's actually a lot of competition around that $1,400 price point. For example, the Zephyrus G14 from ROG is built better, gets a ton of battery life, and because of that 16:10 screen, it feels like it just has as much screen real estate as the Nitro 5. It's also more portable too, which is great. Even last gen's Legion 5 Pro with a 5800H, an incredible screen, and an RTX 3060 is a great buy. So just because something is technically new doesn't mean that it's the best option. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're able to take away everything that you needed to know about the new Nitro 5 series from Acer. Let us know what you guys think about in the comments. I'm Ibor with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Oh, and definitely don't forget to spend responsibly.